let's add another piece of information and say that we'll keep everything the same, except that there's a high likelihood that in 5 years we may end up selling that house or refinancing the house. And in fact, on the average, that's typically what the mortgage only survives about 5 years. So now let's see, as we compare these loans, the trade-off between the interest rate and points if we assume that at some point we're going to sell or refinance the home. Everything else that you see here is the same, except you can see at the very bottom that the only addition that we're making is that we're planning on refinancing in 5 years, or we're only paying on this note for 5 years. If we look at Bank A, you'll notice that the loan payment is the same, $714.99. The difference is on this chart for Bank A versus the chart that we looked at, the number of days. In this case, if you recall, we paid it over 360 periods in the previous chart. If we plan on paying this loan off in 60 days, we change the number of periods, but notice that we borrowed $102,255, but at the end of 5 years, we still owe $96,752. As you compare the two charts, we're still amortizing this over 30 years. At the end of 5 years, we still owe $96,752. That also should be a little bit startling. After paying $714 60 times, you paid $100,000 for that payment. You've bought it down how much? $3,300 roughly? Not very much, is it? You know, and that's one of the things you have to be careful with, because you've probably in some point in your life, you've either thought or heard somebody say, I need to buy because if I'm rent, I'm just putting money down a rat hole. I'm just giving it away. I should buy so that I am building equity in something. But do you see here, even after 5 years of paying on the 30-year mortgage, you've only bought that equity down $3,300. That's less than $1,000 a year. Okay, how did we get this book value, this $96,752? We could amortize for the 60 periods. Does anybody want to do that? Want to sit down and do your amortization chart for 60 times? Of course, Excel will do that and spit it out fairly quickly once you get it programmed. But the other is we can use the book value. Remember that we can find the loan balance of that note by calculating its present value of the remaining payments discounted at the contractual rate. And the contractual rate is the 6 1/4 divided by 12. If it's 360 periods in the amortization, we subtract out the 60, there's 300 months left. We do the arithmetic and we come up with that loan amount. Okay, to calculate the actuarial rate, we can look at the net cash flow, and you see that the cash inflow is the $100,000. We have this monthly payment for 59 periods, and then we have the last payment for $97,467, and you can see that at the bottom line on the far right underneath the 60. You can see how those correspond. Now you can, if you would like, do a search procedure and find the yield or the actuarial rate. Or we can use our calculators by manipulating this problem. You see that the $100,000 is still our cash inflow. We also have the $714.99 that we're paying for 60 periods, so we can use the USPV. Instead of using the net cash flow in the 60th period, let's just use the loan balance. So if you see that $96,752, that corresponds to the principal amount in the 60th year. And so we're looking at getting $100,000 today. We're paying the monthly payment for 60 periods, and then we have at the end of that 5 years, we have that loan balance. And if we put it in that framework, then we can solve it very easily. We put it in our timeline as I've laid out. And we can then, with our calculators, put 60 in. $100,000 is our present value, then negative payment of $714.99, and a negative future value, which is the loan balance of $96,752, and we compute the I. And it comes out to 0.67%. Now that's the monthly rate, so to convert it to the annual rate, we have to multiply it by 12. Okay, so to calculate the annual percentage rate, We have to multiply by 12, as I just mentioned. That gives us 8.05% as our annual percentage rate. We're not going to worry about the effective rate because we're comparing two loans with the same number of conversion periods per year, meaning monthly. Okay, we're going to do the same thing now with Bank B. Again, I'm not going to focus on the loan payment. Even though we're paying this off in 5 years, we're still amortizing it over 30, so we still use the same formula to get the $706.41 per month. And we also use the book value to calculate what the loan balance is going to be at the end of 5 years. Again, there's 30 payments left, and the contractual rate that was given, we divide that by 12 to get the monthly rate, and the book value comes out to $97,731. So the payment on this was even less. I mean, the amount of money that you paid off over those 5 years is only $2,300. Everything else is laid out pretty much the same. Again, we can calculate the actuarial rate using the net cash flow, that bottom line, to calculate the rate that makes the present value of the cash inflows equal to the present value of the cash outflows, and use a search procedure to calculate that R. Or again, we can rearrange the terms so that we have the payment over the 30 years and that last payment being the loan balance that we have to pay off. Okay, this number is coming from the net cash flow. And notice, however, that this is only for 59 periods. If we go to this one, what's the difference? This is coming from your loan balance. And notice now that we have 60 periods here. It's a sleight of hand here, but it saves you tons of time. You know, the bottom line is still this 98,437, but that 706 now is in the last period. So we can plug this in. Notice again that we have our payments over the 60 periods, and we have the loan balance that we have to pay off at the end of 5 years. So we have the uniform annuity, we have the single sum amount, and you'll notice that we're using the appropriate factors, where we have 60 in, 100,000 present value. That's how much money we're actually getting from the bank to buy the house. We're making 60 monthly payments of $706.41, and at the end of the 5 years, 60 months, we still owe the bank $97,731 that we have to pay off when we refinance or sell the house. And so we calculate the interest, and it comes out to 0.676% monthly rate. Okay, to calculate the APR, we multiply that by 12, and it comes out to 8.11%. Now when we put these numbers together on our chart, we look at it, and what do we conclude? Now remember, when we said we were going to pay this off over 30 years, we concluded that Bank B had the lower interest rate. Now what have we determined? Which bank has the lower APR? Bank A. So it's switched. The comparison between the rate and points, hopefully you now recognize, depends on how long you plan on staying in that house, or before you refinance, or before you sell it. So if we look at this relationship now between the APR and the length of the loan, where the vertical axis is the annual percentage rate that helps us determine which has the least cost. And if you look at, we're going to amortize this loan over 30 years, but the horizontal axis is the year the loan is refinanced or is sold. The house is sold and you pay off the loan in X number of years. Okay, if you look at the first line, which is where you're only paying a quarter point, 25 basis points, but the contractual rate is 7.5%. Let's say, for example, that you took a job right after graduating, you bought the house, and then in 1 year, you're offered to double your salary if you go to Denver. So you sell the house after a year to go to Denver. What would have been your annual percentage rate on that house after 1 year? Been close to 10%. If you pay it off in 3 years, it's going to be about 8.25%. But you see, after about 7 or 8 years, then you see it drops down to high 7%. Okay, it levels off after about 6 or 7 years. If we compare that now if you pay 3 points, but the contractual rate is 7%. So, that's pretty tempting because you're paying 50 basis points less on your interest rate. Okay, this second term looked very attractive because you've got a much lower interest rate. But you have to pay 3% up front. So in this particular case, you take the job, you go to Denver after 1 year. Now what is your interest rate? It's over 12%. In 3 years, it's still up in the 9%, and then at 6 it drops down close to 8%. And then you see somewhere around the 6 or 7%, then there's a trade-off. So based on this scenario, if you think you're stable, wherever you're going to buy your house, you think you're stable and you're going to stay in it at least 10 years, you go with the first or the second loan? You're going to go with the second. On the other hand, if you think that there's a high probability that you're going to be leaving in 5 years, which one do you use? You go with the first. In other words, when you start dealing with points, you can buy down the interest rate. In this case, with roughly 3 points, you could buy your interest rate down 50 basis points, and that looks very attractive. That's a good strategy only if you plan on keeping that house for an extended period of time. And also figure that you're not going to refinance. You now have the tools that you can also draw out these charts and figure out what's best for your situation.